The observation deck smelled like recycled air and nervous sweat. Daniel Reed stood with his hands in his pockets, watching the green and blue planet rotate slowly below. Viridian 7 looked peaceful from orbit, almost inviting with its thick forests and winding rivers. The illusion didn't fool him. You cannot be serious about this. The voice belonged to Chief Surveyor Talvek, whose 4 compound eyes reflected concern in the dim lighting. His insectoid frame clicked and whirred as he moved closer. 17 survey teams have attempted planetary assessment. Only 3 individuals returned, and they lasted mere hours before extraction. Daniel turned away from the viewport. Around him, various alien species worked at their stations, occasionally glancing his way with what he assumed was pity. A reptilian communications officer shook her head slowly. 2 engineering techs, both from water worlds, whispered to each other in bubbling tones. The statistics are clear, Talvek continued, pulling up a holographic display. Red dots marked landing sites across the planet's surface. Most die by dawn. The temperature drops 40 degrees after sunset. The fauna are universally aggressive. The flora contains toxins we barely understand. 3 moons create tidal forces that trigger seismic activity. And the storms. He trailed off, mandibles clicking in distress. Daniel studied the data without speaking. He'd seen worse, though he wouldn't say that out loud. Growing up in Siberia's remote wilderness had taught him things these aliens, despite their advanced technology, couldn't comprehend. Cold was cold. Predators were predators. Survival was survival. Sounds like home, he said quietly. The observation deck fell silent. Even a normal hum of equipment seemed to pause. Talvek's eyes widened in what Daniel recognized as shock. Home. Your planet is classified as a death world. We know this. But Viridian 7 makes Earth look hospitable by comparison. The chief surveyor moved his primary manipulators in agitation. The survey is important, yes. The minerals, the biological data, all valuable, but not worth a life. Then why send anyone? Daniel asked. Protocol demands physical verification before claiming rights. But perhaps we should simply forfeit this one to the void. Daniel shook his head. I'll go. I've read the reports. I know what I'm getting into. A medical officer, whose species Daniel couldn't identify, approached with scanning equipment. Your physical parameters are within acceptable range, but psychologically, this reads as suicidal behavior. I cannot approve this. I'm not suicidal. I am qualified. Daniel pulled out his personnel file on a datapad. Wilderness Survival Certification. Search and Rescue Experience. Environmental Science degree. I've spent months alone in conditions that would kill most species in your database. This is what I do. Talvek examined the file, his mandibles moving in thought. The human stubborn streak is documented, but this seems excessive even by your species standards. Maybe. Daniel moved back to the viewport. Or maybe I'm the right person for the job because I understand something you don't, which is that surviving isn't about having the best technology or the most knowledge. It's about adapting, reading the environment, respecting what wants to kill you while figuring out how to stay alive anyway. He looked at his reflection in the glass. Earth taught me that lesson early. The chief surveyor was quiet for a long moment. Finally, his translator crackled to life again. Very well, but we prepare you properly. Standard survey equipment, enhanced emergency beacon, reinforced drop pod. You will check in every 12 hours. At the first sign of critical danger, we extract you immediately. Agreed. Agreed. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel suited up in lightweight armor designed for mobility rather than protection. The logic was sound. If something on Viridian 7 wanted you dead, armor wouldn't help much anyway. Better to move fast. He loaded his pack with essentials. Water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, fire-starting equipment, a combat knife, and emergency rations for 1 week. The weapons locker offered various options. Plasma rifles, sonic disruptors, molecular disintegrators. Daniel chose a simple projectile pistol and a machete. The armory officer looked disappointed. Primitive weapons for a primitive approach, she muttered. Reliable weapons that won't fail when it matters. Daniel corrected that in the drop pod bay. Talvek performed final checks. The pod will land near a water source in the southern continent. Forest coverage is dense. Avoid the northern regions entirely. The predators there are excessive. Noted, Daniel Reed. The chief surveyor's tone shifted to something almost gentle. You have courage. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Try to prove our statistics wrong. Daniel strapped himself into the pod. Through the small viewport, he could see dozens of alien faces watching him. They expected him to die. Hell, they practically accepted it as fact. The thought should have bothered him more than it did. The pod door sealed with a hiss. Warning lights flickered on. His stomach lurched as the launch sequence initiated. Insertion in 30 seconds, the automated voice announced. Surface temperature, 28 degrees. Local time, 1700 hours. Sunset in approximately 2 hours. Daniel gripped the harness straps. 2 hours of daylight to secure shelter and assess threats. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It had to be enough. The pod detached from the station with a shudder. Through the viewport, space gave way to atmosphere. The planet's surface rushed up to meet him, green and vast and deadly. Fire bloomed around the pod as friction heated the exterior hull. He thought about Talvek's words. Most die by dawn. Daniel had survived 40 below winters with nothing but a knife and matches. He'd tracked wolves through blizzards. He'd gone 3 days without food in terrain that killed unprepared travelers in hours. Viridian, 7 wanted to kill him. Fine. Everything wanted to kill everybody eventually. The difference was simple. Daniel Reed knew how to refuse. The impact drove the air from Daniel's lungs. Metal screamed against wood and earth as the pod carved a trench through the alien forest. When everything finally stopped moving, he hung sideways in the harness. Ears ringing, he unclipped himself and dropped onto what used to be the sidewall. The main hatch refused to open, jammed by the crash. Daniel kicked it 3 times before the emergency bolts blew. The hatch flew outward, and he stumbled into his first breath of Viridian. 7 AI, our IT tasted like copper and flowers. The forest surrounded him in shades of purple and green. Trees stretched upward easily 100 feet, their bark covered in bioluminescent moss that pulsed with soft light. Vines hung between branches like natural curtains. The ground was soft with dark soil and decomposing plant matter. Everything dripped with moisture. Daniel checked his equipment. The beacon was functional, his pack intact, weapons undamaged. The pod itself was a loss. Scorch marks covered the hull, and the navigation system sparked uselessly. Smoke rose from the engine compartment. That he had 90 minutes until sunset. First priority, shelter. Daniel circled outward from the crash site, looking for defensible positions. Most trees were too tall to climb quickly. The undergrowth was too dense for clear sight lines. Then he spotted a rock formation 30 meters away, partially hidden by hanging moss. Natural overhang, solid back wall, clear approach from the front. Perfect. Daniel worked fast. He dragged panels from the wrecked pod to form a windbreak. Gathered dead wood that looked dry enough to burn. Cleared the ground of debris and created a fire pit using stones from a nearby stream. The water moved quickly over smooth rocks, probably safe to drink after purification. He was piling the last of the firewood when movement caught his eye. Something in the trees. Large. Watching that, Daniel's hand moved to his pistol without conscious thought. He scanned the canopy, but saw nothing clearly. Just shadows and that pulsing moss light. But the feeling of being observed pressed against his awareness like physical weight. I see you, he said quietly, not sure why he spoke. I'm not here to hurt you, just passing through. No response. The forest had gone quiet though. No bird calls, no insect sounds, nothing. That meant predator nearby, something at the top of the food chain. Sunset arrived in shades of orange and purple. The temperature dropped immediately, plummeting at least 15 degrees in the first 20 minutes. Daniel got the fire going using a magnesium starter. Real flames, not plasma or energy fields. Something about actual fire felt safer in this place. That he ate a protein bar and drank purified water while darkness claimed the forest. The three moons rose one by one, each casting different colored light through the canopy. The bioluminescent plants responded by increasing their glow. The forest transformed into something from a fever dream, all strange colors and shifting shadows. Then the sound started, howls in the distance, clicking noises nearby, something large moving through the undergrowth. Daniel kept the fire between himself and the open forest, his back against solid rock. The pistol sat within easy reach. 2 hours after sunset, he saw his first predator. It came from the left, low to the ground. 6 legs covered in scales that rattled like dried leaves. Eyes that reflected the firelight in yellow pools. Mouth full of curved teeth designed for ripping meat. About the size of a large dog, but built for killing. Daniel stayed motionless. The creature circled the camp's perimeter, testing for weakness. It made a sound like grinding metal. He recognized the behavior from Earth predators. Assessing threat level. Deciding if the prey was worth the risk, he grabbed a burning branch from the fire and stood slowly. The creature hissed, backing away but not fleeing. Daniel waved the fire, not aggressively, just showing he could defend himself. They stared at each other across 10 feet of alien forest floor. Finally, the creature turned and melted back into the darkness. Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He didn't sleep. Couldn't afford to. He kept the fire burning and stayed alert, watching the tree line. More sounds echoed through the night. Something massive moved in the distance, making the ground tremble slightly. Twice more, smaller predators approached the camp and retreated when he showed awareness. This was the test. This was what killed most survey teams. They landed, they set up camp, they fell asleep, and they never woke up. Daniel had learned patience in Siberia. He'd once stayed awake for 40 hours, tracking a wounded wolf away from a village. This was no different. Just another night, another threat, another challenge to outlast. Around midnight, he sensed it again. The presence from earlier, the one in the trees. He scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, but saw nothing concrete. Just a suggestion of movement. A shape that might be branches or might be something else entirely. Still there, he asked the darkness. Guess I'm more interesting than I thought. Hours crawled past. Daniel fed the fire, rotated his watch positions, and listened to the alien forest live its nocturnal life. Screams and growls painted audio pictures of hunts and death happening just beyond his small circle of light. When the first moon began to set, something changed. The ambient sound shifted. Predators that had been calling fell silent. Even the insects stopped their chirping. Daniel's hand moved to his knife. From the darkness came a new sound. Soft footfalls, too light for something large, but too controlled for something small. Multiple legs moving in coordination. He turned toward the sound. Every muscle tense. 2 eyes appeared in the shadows beyond the fire. Not yellow like the scaled predator. These were different. Pale blue, almost white, reflecting the firelight like mirrors. Intelligent eyes. Whatever owned those eyes stepped closer, just to the edge of the light. Daniel's breath caught. The creature was massive. Easily 300 pounds of coiled muscle and lethal grace. 6 legs, each ending in retractable claws that looked sharp enough to cut steel. Its body was covered in crystalline fur that caught and reflected light in prismatic patterns. The face was feline but alien, with those pale blue eyes set above a mouth that could swallow his head whole. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. They stared at each other across the dying fire. Daniel forced himself to breathe normally. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but running from an apex predator was suicide. He learned that lesson young when a Siberian tiger had cornered him near a frozen river. Show fear and die. Show aggression and die. The only option was calm. The creature's crystalline fur shifted colors in the firelight, white to silver to pale blue. Its 6 legs distributed weight perfectly, ready to spring in any direction. Those pale eyes tracked Daniel's smallest movements with disturbing intelligence. Easy, Daniel said softly. His voice sounded too loud in the silent forest. I'm not food. Well, I am technically, but I'm really not worth the effort. The creature tilted its head slightly. The movement was so cat-like that Daniel almost smiled despite the terror coursing through him. He'd always liked cats, though this one could bite him in half. That he slowly reached into his pack, maintaining eye contact. The creature's ears flicked forward, interested. Daniel pulled out a ration bar and unwrapped it deliberately. The smell of processed protein filled the air. "Probably tastes terrible to you," he said, breaking off a piece. "But it's all I've got for sharing." He tossed the piece halfway between them and backed away from the fire. The creature's eyes followed the food, but didn't move toward it. Smart enough not to fall for obvious tricks. Minutes passed. Neither moved. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the darkness. Finally, the creature took one step forward, then another. It moved with liquid grace, each paw placed precisely. When it reached the ration piece, it sniffed once and then looked back at Daniel, testing him. Seeing if approach meant attack, Daniel sat down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. The creature watched this transformation with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. Then it lowered its head and ate the ration piece in one bite. "Good?" Daniel asked. "Yeah, didn't think so." The creature sat back on its haunches, wrapping its tail around its legs. The pose was so domestic, so normal, that Daniel felt some of his tension ease. This thing had decided not to kill him. "For now, I'm Daniel," he said, feeling foolish but needing to fill the silence. "I'm from Earth. I don't suppose you understand anything I'm saying." The creature's ears rotated toward him, listening. "I'm going to call you Frost, because of your coloring. Hope you don't mind." Frost made a sound, low in its throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Acknowledgement maybe, or warning. Hard to tell. Daniel added wood to the fire and settled in for the rest of the night. Frost remained at the edge of the light, sometimes visible, sometimes not. Once, Daniel heard something approach from the forest. Frost's head snapped toward the sound, and a deep rumble emerged from its chest. Whatever was out there retreated quickly. When dawn finally broke, pink and orange across the alien sky, Daniel stood and stretched. His back ached from the long night. He turned to check on Frost and froze. Bodies everywhere. Around the perimeter of his camp lay at least a dozen dead creatures. The scaled predator from earlier. Several smaller things with too many teeth. Something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a spider, its legs curled in death. They formed a rough circle around his shelter, none closer than 20 feet. Frost sat on an outcropping of rock, grooming one massive paw. Unconcerned, Daniel walked the circle slowly, examining each corpse. Claw marks, bite wounds, crushed skulls. All fresh, all from the night. While he'd sat by the fire, this creature had hunted everything that approached. Protected him. "Why?" he asked, looking up at Frost. The creature stopped grooming and met his eyes. Daniel saw something there, some spark of recognition or curiosity, or maybe just feline amusement at this strange two-legged thing. "Well, thanks, I guess." Frost stood, stretched in a way that was disturbingly cat-like for something that size, and leaped down from the rock. It walked past Daniel, heading into the forest. After 10 steps, it stopped and looked back. "You want me to follow?" Frost's tail flicked once. Impatience. Daniel grabbed his pack, kicked dirt over the fire, and followed. What else was he going to do? He needed to survey the planet anyway, and having an apex predator as a guide seemed smarter than wandering alone. They moved through the forest for hours. Frost led with absolute confidence, taking paths that Daniel would never have found alone. The creature seemed to know which plants were dangerous, which areas were too exposed, where water sources lay hidden beneath rocks and roots. Around midday, they reached a clearing beside a fast-moving stream. Frost drank deeply, then settled on a sun-warmed boulder. Daniel filled his water containers and ate another ration bar. The taste was getting old fast that he pulled out his survey equipment and began taking readings. Soil composition, air quality, mineral deposits. Standard protocol. Frost watched with mild interest, sometimes moving closer to investigate the beeping instruments. "Don't suppose you know where the good mineral deposits are?" Daniel asked. Frost yawned. showing teeth that could tear through steel. Yeah, that's what I thought. The afternoon passed in strange peace. Daniel worked while Frost dozed or groomed or occasionally disappeared into the forest for short periods. Always returning. Always checking that Daniel was still there. By evening, Daniel had covered 5 square kilometers of terrain, more than any previous survey team had managed. The data painted an interesting picture. Viridian 7 was rich in rare elements, had diverse ecosystems, and would absolutely kill unprepared visitors within hours. He also noted something else. Everywhere Frost led him, other predators had retreated. They'd seen signs of life constantly, but nothing had approached. Nothing had challenged them. Frost was clearly dominant here, and by association, Daniel was untouchable. As the second sunset approached, Frost led him to a cave system carved into a hillside. Natural shelter, defensible, with multiple exits. Perfect. Daniel set up camp inside while Frost settled at the entrance, those pale eyes scanning the darkening forest. Guardian and protected, hunter and companion. Whatever this was, whatever strange alliance had formed between human and alien apex predator, Daniel was grateful for it. Week 1 passed into week 2 with a rhythm that surprised Daniel. Wake before dawn, break camp, follow Frost through terrain that would have killed him alone. The creature knew this forest like Daniel knew the back of his hand. Every safe path, every water source, every shelter worth using. They developed a language without words. Frost's ears forward meant safe to proceed. Ears flat meant danger nearby. A particular chirping sound meant food source ahead, usually something Frost had killed and left for Daniel. The creature seemed to understand that humans couldn't eat raw meat the way it could, so it brought him creatures that looked less toxic than others. Daniel learned to read the environment through Frost's reactions. When the creature's crystalline fur stood on end, storms were coming. When it paused mid-stride with one paw raised, something dangerous was close. When it made a rumbling purr sound, all was well. That on day 10, they found the ruins. Ancient structures jutted from the forest floor like broken teeth. Stone walls covered in the same bioluminescent moss that grew on everything else. Carved symbols weathered but still visible. Daniel's survey equipment went wild with readings. "This is big," he muttered, recording everything with his scanner. "Talvek is going to lose his mind." Frost sniffed at a collapsed doorway, then squeezed through. Daniel followed carefully, ducking under a crumbling archway. Inside was darkness broken by shafts of light through gaps in the ceiling. More symbols covered the walls, telling stories in a language he couldn't read. He spent hours documenting the site, while Frost explored the ruins with feline curiosity. The creature seemed fascinated by the ancient structures, pawing at carvings and occasionally making questioning sounds. "Your ancestors, maybe?" Daniel asked, photographing a wall mural. "Or whoever used to live here before the forest took over." Frost's only answer was to knock over a pottery fragment with one massive paw. They made camp in the ruins that night. Daniel felt safer surrounded by walls, even crumbling ones. He transmitted his findings to the orbital station via the emergency beacon. The response came back quickly. Talvek's excitement clear even through the text-only message. "Unprecedented discovery. Continue documentation. How are you surviving down there?" Daniel looked at Frost, who was batting at a glowing moth the size of his hand. "Made a friend. Clarify. Local predator. We have an understanding." There was a long pause before the next message. "You've domesticated an apex predator in 10 days. Not domesticated. More like mutual respect agreement." Another pause. "Humans are insane. Continue your work. Try not to die." On day 13, the understanding was tested. They were crossing a ravine via a fallen log when Frost suddenly went rigid. Ears flat, fur standing straight out, a growl building in its chest that Daniel felt more than heard. He froze halfway across the log. From the ravine below came an answering roar. Something massive pulled itself onto the far side of the log. Daniel's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The creature was twice Frost's size, covered in overlapping armor plates that looked like dark metal. 6 legs, ending in talons that dug furrows in the wood. a head shaped like a battering ram with eyes that glowed orange. Bad, Daniel whispered. That's very bad. Frost's response was immediate. The creature launched itself forward, meeting the armored predator in the middle of the log. They collided with a sound like cars crashing. Daniel threw himself flat as the two titans fought above him, claws and teeth seeking purchase. The log cracked ominously. Daniel scrambled backward, trying to reach solid ground. Behind him, Frost and the armored thing rolled off the log, falling into the ravine below. He heard the impact, heard Frost scream of pain and rage. Without thinking, Daniel descended the ravine wall. Handholds, footholds, focus on the next grip. Don't think about falling. Don't think about what's happening below. He dropped the last 10 feet and landed hard. His ankle twisted but held. The two predators were locked together, a whirlwind of violence. Blood splattered the rocks, mixing colors he didn't have names for. Frost was losing. The armored plating was too thick, the other creature too heavy. It had Frost pinned, jaws closing toward the throat. Daniel pulled his pistol and fired 3 times into the armored predator's side. The shots ricocheted off the plating uselessly. The creature didn't even acknowledge him. He looked around frantically. Rocks, branches, nothing useful. Then he saw it, a gap where the armored plates met at the creature's neck. Narrow, but there. Daniel ran forward, drawing his knife. Stupid, suicidal. But Frost was dying. He jumped onto the armored predator's back and drove the knife into the gap with all his strength. The blade sank into the hilt. Hot blood, almost scalding, poured over his hands. The creature reared back, releasing Frost to deal with this new threat. IT spun, trying to dislodge him. Daniel held on, twisting the knife, feeling vertebrae separate. The creature's movements became erratic, then weak, then stopped entirely. It collapsed sideways, almost crushing him. Daniel rolled clear, gasping. His hands were burned where the blood had touched them. His ankle screamed, but he was alive. Frost struggled to its feet, limping badly. One leg hung at a wrong angle. Deep gashes crossed its chest and shoulders. The creature moved toward Daniel, and he tensed, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was. Frost pressed its massive head against his chest, careful of the injuries. The rumbling purr sound filled the ravine. Yeah, Daniel said, wrapping his arms around the creature's neck. We're even. They stayed like that for a long moment, two survivors in a hostile world, bound by something neither fully understood. Then came the hard part, getting out of the ravine and treating their wounds. Daniel fashioned a splint for Frost's leg using branches and torn cloth from his pack. The creature tolerated his ministrations with surprising patience, only growling once when he set the bone. His medical supplies were limited, but he did what he could. Antiseptic on the worst cuts, bandages were possible, painkillers for both of them from his emergency supply. They spent 3 days in that ravine, healing and resting. 3 weeks into the survey, Daniel's equipment started showing unusual atmospheric readings. Pressure dropping fast. Electromagnetic interference spiking. Temperature fluctuations beyond normal patterns. Frost noticed before the instruments did. The creature became restless, pacing their camp, looking toward the northern sky with ears flat against its head. That low rumble of unease never stopped. Storm? Daniel asked, though he knew Frost couldn't answer. The creature made a sharp chirping sound, then started walking. Not their usual exploration pace. Urgent, purposeful, with frequent looks back to ensure Daniel followed. They traveled for 6 hours straight, barely stopping. Frost led them deeper into the forest, toward higher ground. The sky darkened from blue to gray to something like bruised flesh. Wind picked up, bending trees that had stood for centuries. Daniel checked his beacon. The message from orbit was short and terrifying. Major storm system forming. Triple moon alignment triggering atmospheric cascade. Find shelter immediately. We cannot extract until it passes. Good luck. How long? He typed back. 3 days minimum. Possibly 5. Winds expected to exceed 200 kilometers per hour. Electrical activity off the charts. This is beyond anything in our models. Daniel looked at Frost, who was already climbing a rocky hillside. The creature knew. Somehow it knew. They reached the cave system as the first drops of rain began to fall. Not water, exactly. The liquid was thicker, slightly luminescent, and it hissed when it hit the ground. Daniel didn't want to know what was in it. The cave entrance was narrow, but opened into a larger chamber. Frost squeezed through and disappeared into darkness. Daniel followed, using his light to navigate. The passage twisted downward, opening into a cavern easily 40 feet across. Perfect shelter. Multiple chambers, water source from an underground stream, natural ventilation shafts. And most importantly, deep enough to protect them from whatever hell was about to break loose outside. He'd barely set up his gear when the storm hit. The sound was apocalyptic. Wind screamed through the entrance like a living thing. Rain hammered the ground so hard it sounded like gunfire. Lightning struck constantly, turning the cave entrance into a strobe light. Thunder shook loose dirt from the ceiling. Then the cave entrance collapsed. Rocks, dirt, and debris came down in a roar that drowned out even the storm. Daniel threw himself backward as the opening sealed itself with tons of stone. When the dust settled, they were in complete darkness except for his flashlight. "Okay," he said aloud, hearing the shake in his own voice. "Okay, we're alive. We have another exit somewhere. We have water. We're fine." Frost pressed against his side, warm and solid. The creature's breathing was steady calm. Somehow that helped. Daniel mapped the cave system by light and touch. 3 main chambers, connected by passages. The underground stream ran through all of them. Side tunnels branched off in multiple directions. Some were dead ends. Others went deeper, potentially offering alternative exits. They settled in the largest chamber. Daniel rationed his supplies carefully. Food for a week, maybe 10 days if he stretched it. Water was unlimited from a stream. Light was the real problem. His flashlight and beacon had limited battery life. After that, darkness. On the second day, Frost led him to something impossible. One of the side tunnels opened into a smaller chamber covered in carvings. Not random scratches, deliberate art, stories told in pictures and symbols. Daniel's light revealed scenes of catastrophe. The 3 moons aligned, storms destroying the surface, people retreating underground. "They knew," he whispered, "the civilization that built the ruins. They knew about these storms." More carvings showed survival underground, generations living in darkness, eventually emerging to find their world transformed. The final images were unclear, partially eroded. Either they adapted or they died. History didn't say which. Frost sat beside him, looking at the carvings with those intelligent eyes. Daniel wondered if the creature understood, if maybe its species had inherited instincts from whatever came before. "Your ancestors were smart," Daniel said, running his hand along the wall. "Ours were too. Built cities in ice, deserts, places that shouldn't support life. We're survivors, both of us. That's got to count for something." The storm raged for 3 days exactly. On the 4th day, the sounds diminished. On the 5th, there was silence. Daniel and Frost worked together to dig out an alternative exit through one of the side tunnels. It took hours of clearing rocks and dirt, Frost's powerful legs and claws doing most of the heavy work. When they finally broke through to daylight, the world had changed. The forest was devastated. Trees stripped of leaves, some snapped like twigs. The ground was covered in debris and that strange luminescent rain residue, which was already evaporating in the sun. The alien world looked even more alien now, raw and wounded, but alive. Birds, or whatever passed for birds here called in the distance. Something moved through the underbrush. Life continued, adapted, persisted. Daniel's beacon beeped. Message from orbit. Status report. "Are you alive?" "Alive. Found shelter underground with my friend. We're fine." "Incredible. You have now survived longer on Viridian 7 than any surveyor in recorded history. The Council wants to extend your mission. Will you continue?" Daniel looked at Frost, who was already scanning the transformed landscape with tactical awareness. The creature glanced back at him, tail flicking in what he'd learned to recognize as impatience. Places to go, territory to check, survival to accomplish. "Yeah," Daniel typed. "We'll continue." "For how long?" That was the question. He had supplies for another few weeks, maybe a month if he stretched it. After that, he'd need resupply or extraction. But looking at Frost, at this strange companion who'd protected him, guided him, fought beside him, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "Ask me again in a month," he replied. Frost made the rumbling purr sound and started walking. Daniel shouldered his pack and followed. They had work to do, a planet to survey, and a partnership that somehow worked despite every logical reason it shouldn't. The forest, broken but recovering, waited to test them again. Day 31 arrived with clear skies and the smell of new growth. The forest had recovered faster than Daniel expected. Fresh vegetation pushed through the storm debris. Animals returned to their territories. Life found a way, as it always did. Daniel sat on a cliff overlooking the southern valley, updating his survey logs. Behind him, Frost groomed one massive paw, completely relaxed. The creature's leg had healed well, barely a limp remaining. The scars from their ravine fight were covered by new crystalline fur growth. His beacon chimed. "Incoming shuttle. This is orbital station. Retrieval shuttle launching in 1 hour. Your mission parameters are complete. Excellent work, Daniel. We'll have you home soon." Home. The word felt strange. Daniel looked around the cliff, at the alien forest stretching to the horizon, at the ruins they'd discovered and documented, at the cave systems that had saved their lives, at Frost, who'd stopped grooming to watch him with those pale blue eyes. "Acknowledge receipt," he typed. "Shuttle can land at original crash site coordinates. I've cleared the area. 60 minutes. He should pack, should prepare, should feel something about leaving." Instead, he felt hollow. Frost stood and walked to the cliff edge, looking down at the valley. The creature made a questioning sound, low in its throat. Daniel recognized the tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said. Then, honest, everything. "I have to leave soon." The creature tilted its head, listening. Daniel had stopped questioning whether Frost understood him. Maybe it did. Maybe it just read his tone and body language perfectly. Either way, the communication worked. "My people are coming to take me back to the station. Back to space, to other worlds, to my own kind." He paused. "You can't come with me. And I can't stay here." Could he? The thought had been growing for weeks now. What was waiting for him up there? Another assignment, another survey, another temporary home. He'd been alone most of his adult life, moving from place to place, never settling. It was what he knew, what he was good at. But here, he wasn't alone. Frost moved closer, pressing its shoulder against his leg. The touch was gentle for a creature that could tear through armor plating. Daniel reached down and ran his fingers through the crystalline fur. It felt like cool silk over hard muscle. "I'll miss you too," he said quietly. They sat like that for a long time, human and alien predator, watching the sun move across a foreign sky. When the shuttle appeared as a bright point descending through the atmosphere, Frost's ears flicked toward it. Alert but not alarmed. The creature had seen the orbital station lights at night, knew something existed beyond this world. Daniel stood and shouldered his pack. "Come on, I want them to meet you properly." They reached the old crash site as the shuttle touched down. The pilot was the same bird-like alien who'd expressed shock at his survival. Through the cockpit window, Daniel could see her eyes widen even further. The rear hatch opened. The pilot emerged slowly, staying close to the shuttle. Her translator crackled to life. "That creature, that is an apex predator. Multiple reports in our database list them as extremely dangerous." "This is Frost," Daniel said. "We're friends." "Friends?" The pilot's feathers ruffled in what might have been disbelief. "You befriended the most lethal predator on Viridian 7. Not befriended exactly. More like mutual respect situation." Daniel gestured to Frost, who sat calmly despite the shuttle's presence. "Frost saved my life multiple times, guided me to shelter, taught me how to read this world." The pilot was quiet for a moment. "Command wants you to return immediately. Your data has been invaluable. The Council is already discussing colonization rights based on your findings." Colonization? Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're going to develop this planet? The resources here are significant. The ruins you discovered suggest previous habitation. With proper preparation, this world could support settlement. She paused. Is there a problem? Daniel looked at Frost, at the forest beyond, at the world that had tried to kill him and somehow become something more. What happens to the native life? Standard protocols. Protected zones, environmental monitoring, minimal disruption. The pilot's tone was professional, rehearsed. We're not conquerors, Daniel. We're explorers. This is what we do. Maybe. But Daniel had seen what exploration became when resources were involved. He'd watched Earth's wild places shrink under development. Some survived. Many didn't. I need to think, he said. Can you give me a few minutes? The pilot nodded. We have time before launch window. But not much. Daniel walked away from the shuttle, Frost following. They moved into the tree line, out of sight. The creatures seemed to sense his conflict, making soft, questioning sounds. They want to change this place, Daniel said. Bring people here, build things, extract resources. It might be careful. It might be respectful. But it'll never be the same. Frost butted its head against his chest. The gesture was so cat-like, so familiar despite everything alien about this creature, that Daniel had to smile. What if I stayed? The words came out before he'd fully formed the thought. What if I extended my mission? Long-term survey, maybe years. I could monitor the development, make sure they do it right. Protect places that need protecting. The more he spoke, the more right it felt. Someone who understood this world should be here to speak for it. Someone who'd survived it, learned from it, formed bonds with it. Someone who had a friend here. He pulled out his beacon and typed a message to Talvek. Request extended mission assignment. Permanent station en Viridian 7. I can coordinate colonization efforts, ensure environmental protection, provide ongoing survey data. I understand this world better than anyone. Let me help do this right. The response took 5 minutes. Approved. Resupply drops every 3 months. Construction teams arrive in 6 months for initial outpost. You'll liaise between them and the environment. Welcome to your new home, Daniel. New home. Yeah, that sounded right. Daniel returned to the shuttle and informed the pilot. She looked at him like he'd grown another head. You want to stay here? Voluntarily? Yeah. Humans really are insane. Maybe. Daniel scratched behind Frost's ear, earning a rumbling purr. Or maybe we just know where we belong. The shuttle left without him, carrying his data, but leaving him behind with supplies for the next 3 months. Daniel watched it disappear into the sky, then turned to Frost. Just you and me now, partner. Hope you don't mind company long-term. Frost's response was to turn and walk into the forest. After 3 steps, the creature looked back, tail flicking. Impatient. Places to go, territory to patrol, life to live. Daniel laughed and followed. The alien sun was warm on his face. The forest smelled like copper and flowers. Somewhere in the distance, other creatures called, and Frost's ears rotated toward the sounds. Home didn't have to be where you came from. Sometimes it was where you ended up, against all odds, with a companion you never expected. As they disappeared into the trees, Daniel realized he was smiling. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Wasn't just surviving. He was living, and that made all the difference.